Yes, do that right now.
Okay.
Tell me the full motion and then we'll
Great.
start the time.
All right, this is a great motion brought to you by June Kim himself. This House supports stethoscope activism. So the slide is that NRA members told doctors to, quote, stay in their lane after saying that gun legislation has nothing to do with medical profession. Now, doctors responded to this by taking to social media to post like gruesome photos of post-op rooms, of like gun violence victims' wounds, and statements such as like 10 more unreported shootings in the ER today alone on the hashtag, hashtag this is our lane. This would be considered an example of stethoscope activism.
Cool.
All right, so on the motion, this House supports stethoscope activism. We think that this House is going to be set in the United States, and stethoscope activism is just doctors making declarations on public issues that they deem to pose public health threats, but might not be perceived in the general population as like having a public health element. For example, gun violence. For example, the like border migration crisis. We think that these are not necessarily going to be their private personal opinions, but they're actually being made based on their experience and their legitimacy as doctors, and they get to weigh in on these public debates, presumably with the affiliation to an institution or the hospital that they are working in. And also the aspect of supporting this activism would be to ensure that these doctors won't be punished by the institutions that they are doing this political activism under, making sure that they can't be like fired, for example, by saying things like this. Obviously, this doesn't include things like hate speech or things that aren't grounded in like daily medical profession, so I think that that's out of that round. Are there any questions? Okay, if not, on to two main arguments. First, on how this shifts policy debates, and then can result in more supportive legislation, and second, on how we can offer better personalized care. So I think that in terms of shifting policy debates, a lot of issues such as like the border crisis or gun control, it's framed as like either a rights issue or like something beyond public health, right? I think that the health side of these of this legislation is really not emphasized. We think that the best legislation should reflect not only like the principle, but should reflect the actual outcomes of what this legislation enacts, right? Because if you're able to like just say, oh, well, we deserve the right to guns, then you don't really consider the fact that guns kill hundreds of people or like thousands of people each year, right? I think that the most important thing that we ought to focus on when passing legislation is the actual impact. I think so far, like the left's response to this whole like rights issue has been really insufficient because we just provide like statistics or infographics or emotional stories of shootings in order to counter these like rights narratives. And I think that for a lot of people on the right, these numbers are seen to be very like easily manipulated or like very easily discredited because they're unable to portray like what's actually happening on the ground, right? Or they just feel like, oh, these stories don't really have objectivity. Your son probably shouldn't have been like a gang member, right? I think that it's very easy for current examples to be ignored. I think the fact that we're unable to shift these policy debates to encompass like the consequences poses an issue. And we think that doctors are actually uniquely in a position to be listened to because of their legitimacy as like doctors, right? We see that doctors are very respected within society. They're seen as like pretty nonpartisan usually. We think that because they're able to provide like a unique stance on an issue that shows like, hey, actually we are being impacted by this policy as well, you're able to have more people who are willing to like listen to the other side and who are able to see that this policy has consequences beyond just like what is incredibly partisan right now. I think that because doctors deal with the lived experiences of like the aftermath of this like irresponsible legislation, it's probably like definitely okay for them to speak up about these issues and to show kind of the gruesome side of these policies, right? I think that when doctors are able to speak up and say like, hey, migrant children are like dying in these detention centers, this is a public health issue, you should like actually care about the health of these people, because I think that's something that generally people can agree on no matter what side of the like border issue you're on. That's when you're able to get like Kirsten Nielsen coming up and saying like, oh, we're actually going to improve the medical like care that we give to children who are stuck at the border.
Do you think that people who support ICE and the deportation of like immigrants to the United States don't know that that's bad for those immigrants?
Yes, I think that is in some degrees true, but I think when doctors are able to show like on the ground this is the extent of this, then I think that's much better. Because know that doctors and journalists operate in a lot of different ways, right? I think doctors don't have to like go through screening and don't have to go through like spending a long time writing something and like summarizing facts like journalists who currently present this information do, right? I think when you're able to like see your feed inundated with tweets of doctors like showing the bloody post-op rooms that they operate within and telling the personal stories firsthand of like how big this issue has become, I think you're able to at least turn a couple of minds to think about the consequences of this legislation, right? I think the unique impact that we get is not necessarily that we're going to like completely change gun laws, right? Like it's not that the NRA is going to just be like, oh, you know what, we should just ban guns. But I think you're at least able to shift the focus of these legislation to focus more on those who are like impacted by this legislation. legislation, right? Like, at least you'll get more support for those who have, like, gone through gun violence. Like, at least you can provide those doctors, like, for these, like, children at the migrant holding facilities, right? I think that to the extent in which we're able to at least, to have some supportive legislation in place, we at least get some, like, benefits on our side of the house, right? Second, our point on personalized care, because I think that doctors who currently, like, engage in this who decide to engage in this practice and state their opinions on types of, like, medical issues that don't necessarily have, like, a certain exact way in which you must treat things, such as, like, ADHD or, like, depression. I think that actually allowing doctors to participate in things like stethoscope activism allows patients to seek out doctors that, like, have more similar viewpoints on issues that they want help on, right? Because I think a lot of the status quo is that, like, you don't really know if a doctor supports certain things that you want, but you're uncomfortable, like, confronting them about, like, their professional opinion, because I think because we respect doctors so much, it's very easy to become, like, to take them as an authority figure and to believe that, like, listen to what they're going to say, and to believe that, like, be slowly inundated with the fact that they like, don't support a certain action that you're trying to take. So I think that on the alternative, you might, like, feel pressure to take an action that you might not feel comfortable with, like taking medication for your depression when you would rather, like, for example, get counseling. Right? I think it's much better. You offer patients much more choice when doctors are able to come out and say, here's my stance on this issue that has no clear answer. I think that allows patients to get the care that they need rather than being guilt-tripped into, like, taking something that they don't really feel comfortable in. I think that's just, like, fundamentally better for people who are already struggling with these issues, who already see that this is, like, something that they are uncomfortable with, right? I think that the main crux of this debate is not that we're going to, like, completely revolutionize, like, gun laws or completely revolutionize shift political debates, but at least the fact that we're able to, like, bring a new element into the debate that people haven't focused on, like, at least make, like, the current issue slightly less polarized with, like, a different viewpoint. I think that's incredibly important in terms of getting any sort of, like, change on legislation, in terms of getting any, like, one or two people to change their minds is incredibly important. I think that is what needs to be weighed in this round. Very proud to propose.
Good job. Hello. Sorry, yeah, go ahead.
Okay, firstly, I'd like to start off by pointing out it's a bit unfair of government to pigeonhole us and push us into this corner where we have to defend against people, like, the ability of people to voice themselves. Let us recognize that both sides on this debate are advocates for free speech, and we do agree that they shouldn't be fired, right? I think Opp's characterization is faulty. I'd like to start off by pointing out their point about guns, right? They say, like, even if doctors, like, do post these pictures of bloody operation rooms, it's nothing we haven't seen before, right? The New York Times does post people on the ground who are shot, and there is no real, like, outcome that we haven't seen before, because it just turns it into a tragedy, right? They don't offer any unique mechanisms on the part of why stethoscope activism would be so revolutionary that it should be done, right? But we here inside opposition will offer you constructive onto the point about why this shouldn't be a thing on two sides. Firstly, on the side of doctors, and secondly, on the perspective and rights of patients, right? Firstly, doctors. Here's the thing, you don't have to advocate via stethoscope activism, right? The point of a doctor and their job is to provide the best care that they can for patients, right? We're not saying that you can't voice your opinion as a concerned citizen outside of that medical room. No, we're just saying that stethoscope activism is wrong because it interferes with this care system, right? On the role of patients and why they're the most impacted actors, basically, they go to doctors with that trust and faith, and that doctors will offer them the best sort of care they possibly can, right? And here's why it's impacted. The thing is that doctors, in order to be effective at curing a patient, I believe that they have to be ultimately objective, right? I think when you let them, like, when doctors become stethoscope activists, the role between, like, the line between being a doctor and offering the best care possible versus being a doctor and being able to voice your own beliefs gets so blurred that I just think it has an ultimate impact on care as a whole, right? Here's the thing though, because subjectivity and personal views do have an impact on care, Like, the thing is that doctors are really regarded in society as these influential people. I think people will take them at face value. And it's not fair for doctors to use, like, their sort of role and title in lieu of actual well-supported argumentation, right? For example, government brought this to you about, like, gun control, but that's not the only form of stethoscope activism, right? For example, in the United States, which they did characterize this house as, obesity is a huge issue, right? And I do believe that doctors would undergo stethoscope activism because they see like these obese patients, their quality of life being affected, and having to undergo surgery and that impact on the family. And at first glance, sure, it might seem good that they undergo it, but it's a huge problem in the medical industry when doctors and nurses have these implicit biases against obese people, and what happens is that their care actually becomes affected, and that when they diagnose it, they're much less likely to be sympathetic, and they're much less likely to get to the root of the issue. All they say is, oh, you should change your diet, be healthier, when in fact, a lot of it is based on like genetics and your genetic code, and they don't change it. But when doctors and nurses don't recognize that, the quality of care you actually get is so impacted, and as a patient, it's not fair because you do put a trust in like a doctor to hear you and give you the best possible like service that they can, right? For example, even on a second note, like for example, what if a doctor has to like care for someone who did something against their fundamental moral beliefs, right? How do you think they would be impacted? Sure, you might just say doctors are educated and are supposed to be subjective, but let's face it, they're humans too, and regardless, patients are going to be impacted, and the quality of care is going to go downhill, right? Why stethoscope activism does this is the word stethoscope is in it. Doctors are voicing their opinions as a doctor. I think when you put that weight behind it, patients implicitly offer their blind trust. And secondly, the lines between being a doctor and expressing your personal convictions interfere with you properly doing your job from an objective standpoint, right? Emotions impact care, even if you don't buy into that case entirely. Like, look, there's a point about doctors who can't operate on their own families for the sole reason that, like, you're not going to be able to offer care if you're overwhelmed with your own emotions and opinions, right? You need that cold, hard science and those cold, hard facts, in order to be able to do your job properly, right? Secondly, doctors have a skewed view. Like, side government just stood up and mentioned they're in the operating room all day, and that's precisely why they shouldn't be stethoscope activists, right? The point being that they are in the operating room all day, and sure, I'll give it to them in that they do get to see the repercussions, but they don't get to see the lead up and the like motivations and causes that led up to that moment, right? All they see is an end result. I think by being in the operating room all day, they do have a skewed view of how society works and like how events happen, right? I don't think you can call a doctor like an everyday man when they go to like 10 years of medical school and have like all this like knowledge, because the point in which they're viewing the issue from the lens of a doctor. I also don't think it's like fair for them to be stethoscope activists just because they don't they're like out of touch with society as a whole, and although they might see the end result, they don't see the lead up to that, right? Those causes, right? And the point being that, like, yes.
Doctors already hold their own personal views. It's just that under the status quo,
No, the thing is that doctors hold their own personal views, but why stethoscope activism, as I've mentioned time and time again, is so pernicious is because it blurs the lines between being a doctor and being an advocate. I think by blurring those lines and even having the word stethoscope in it, like, it just ultimately blurs your like view on what your role should be, and it moves away from objectivity and into subjectivity, where doctors feel empowered to like make life-changing decisions, right? For example, even like giving an alcoholic like a liver replacement, right? Doctors might not like it, even though because they find it morally reprehensible, right? Now, moving on to a few reputations, people listen to others. The point being that like now doctors are just like liberal hats in the views of conservatives, and conservatives won't listen to them, right? There's that huge liberal bias in higher education, and the point about thank you.
Okay, great. DPM?
think the palea and psych opposition's argument is that the whole argument has nothing to do with stethoscope activism, but only like explaining that doctors should not have political opinions, right? We think we showed you that doctors already have political views. It's a matter of whether as patients we'll be able to see what kind of opinions these doctors have, which we think is going to have a huge impact in today's debate. Firstly, I will give some rebuttals. Secondly, I will expand on the political implications. Thirdly, I will talk about the increased access to healthcare. Firstly, on rebuttals. So they tell you that now, like, doctors are able to be completely objective and not like interfere their views into the healthcare that they're providing. But we don't think this is necessarily true. Like, we already gave you examples of medication that's already like controversial, right? Like it meant how you deal with mental health patients, how you deal with abortion. These kind of issues, which is not only like politically debated, but also have this debated within like the medical realm, is like these things already exist, right? But as a patient, you cannot go to a doctor knowing what kind of like beliefs that doctor has. The doctor might feel like the over-medication of like ADHD has created extreme harm for society, or like things like prescribing opioid has extreme social consequences, right? We think these things have a huge impact as you, as a patient, to be able to know and recognize what kind of political stance these doctors have. I will expand this point on my third argument, but note that they have provided zero mechanism as to why like showing your views is necessarily going to result in the change of how you treat patients, right? Secondly, they tell you that these things are happening in the status quo through like things like the New York Times posting pictures on the newspaper and nothing is happening. We tell you this is the exact reason why we need doctors to provide these information, right? New York Times is already associated with having a political agenda in favor of the Democratic Party, right? This is exactly why things that impact public health is now being extremely politicized to the extent that like people don't really take these opinions seriously when it comes to like people who are politicians or political parties. Okay, in relation to that, moving on to my first point on the political implications. Firstly, we think it is going to serve a purpose of increasing awareness in general. Like, we think things like mental health issues are social issues that are being ignored in the status quo. But if like doctors start taking action to demand for like policies that deal with mental health issue, we think the status quo would be much better. Even like the things like the opioid crisis may have been able to be dealt with earlier and better when we have political activism by doctors, right? By showing that this is an issue that we deal with every day. There's something going on in society that is a public health concern and politicians should take action. We think this is very, very important. But secondly, we think that the nature of the rhetoric is going to be improved. Right? We already gave you an example of how the NRA or the Republicans and the Democrats has shifted the narrative of like discussing gun ownership to like a rights-based issue, right? We think the extreme polarization that we see in the status quo in the US uniquely means that even if like moderate policies that can help victims extremely is probably going to be objected by the opposing party if it comes from a Democrat, right? Like the Republicans are never going to pass any like regulation laws if it comes from a Democrat. We think doctors are unique actors who are not really seen as associated with having like purely like democratic political views, but like speaking from their past experience as doctors, right? We think moderate policies is much more likely to go through in our paradigm. Not like huge regulations, but things like having child-proof triggers on guns, or like increasing the number of doctors on borders, or like having like more housing policy for poor communities. If the doctors can show that if you don't have good enough housing in winter, people are actually having like consequences on their physical health. We get concrete but moderate but concrete benefits from these things that is going to benefit the most important actor in today's debate, which we think is the patient, right? Okay, so my third point on increased access to healthcare. This is a point of like the importance of knowing your doctor and what their political views are. We think in the status quo, doctors are seen as being extremely objective, and that like you don't really know what kind of political opinions that they hold. Right? For example, if you're seeking for abortion in like the southern part of the United States, you're already facing a huge stigma, right? You like accessing like healthcare resources, or like if you're a drug addict and trying to get rehabilitation, if you do not know what the doctors think of you, or if the doctor even like supports abortion, or like how he views you as a person, we think it can be an extreme barrier to access those kind of health cares because you feel scared that you might be judged by the doctors, right? If you know, okay.
Okay. You say that people are going to listen to doctors, right? That's basically your entire case. The problem is that it's not that people, like I said this in the last video, it's not people in the Midwestern United States don't know that the opioid crisis isn't a crisis. The problem is that there's political interests that exist that are oppositional to that.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that we've been making through the whole two speeches, right? We are saying that the discourse in the status quo has been politicized to the extent that it is about like principled argumentations or ideologies of Democrats versus Republicans. We need to shift the rhetoric that focuses on the concrete impacts, and like we need to make policies impact-based, right? We don't have to have like a principally liberal policy in order to tackle the outcomes of a specific health crisis. We think we are the only bench that adequately characterize the difference between like doctors who are viewed with respect and viewed with usually non-political figures who can actually advocate for policies that have real impact in real life. We also showed you that political discourse is much more likely to happen in our side of the house. We get more discourse on like issues of mental health and other things we are proud to propose.
Great, thanks, Diola. Yep.
Okay, so obviously this debate is about whether or not doctors should be fired for tweets, right? I think at its most like debate, what this debate really is about is whether or not doctors should be like an important or a key role in the left's discourse in order to achieve its policy goals, right? I think that's a lot of the analysis that like Gov gives us. I'll also engage with all the stuff about like people being able to know things about their doctors. But again, I think that really what this debate is about, like the way it should be evaluated is on which side gives a better conception of like whether or not doctors are politically viable as like a figurehead that we should go for and like should give support for, right? I don't think, like Emily said, I don't think we have to defend that doctors shouldn't be able to tweet. But what we are going to say and prove to you is that doctors shouldn't be like a key figure in the left's discourse moving forward, and that stethoscope activism probably isn't that impactful, or at least isn't as impactful as Gov thinks it is. Okay, just wanted to clear that up. So first off, I think the comparative in this round in terms of like discourse, the thing I was just talking about, is between facts and argumentation, right? Because when doctors are posting these images, it's not like they're making this large argument about why gun rights are important or why we should value more these things over the other things, right? What they're doing is just showing an outcome, right? The reason that this isn't impactful, or isn't politically impactful rather, is that it's not that people don't know there are bad things happening, right? It's not like Republicans don't know or don't understand that having gun laws means more people will die of guns. The problem is that they don't care about those things, right? It's that when they see these images, they're like, oh, that's just bad guys with guns, right? That's the problem of crime and why we should like support police more or something like that. It's not an issue. When you just show the outcome of an issue, you also have to link that outcome into like why people view that thing and not just the outcome itself. Like another example is the opioid crisis, right? Like if doctors just tweet like the opioid crisis is happening, people are dying of opioids, right? Like what does that actually do to challenge like the financial interests that exist in like big pharma that are responsible for this, right? Probably nothing. I think really what it does is it allows a lot of like liberal centrist people to see this and be like, oh yeah, doctors are in our side. Hashtag resistance. We're getting it, right? Right, guys? Like we're all in it together. Because the problem with doctors is, so the way that, I'm going to move on to like how people think about doctors, so that's also relevant in this scene, right? Because they say that people just across the board like doctors in that school, but I don't think that that's really like that true. I think a lot of people on the right, as Emily talks about, actually have deep skepticism of doctors and higher education in general. I think also with like in certain areas, like in places where like abortion might be like easily accessible, conservatives are probably even more like skeptical of doctors. That's another reason why they probably aren't going to listen to them. But also from like the liberal perspective of the divide, I think that like the difference between doctors coming out and saying something versus like an activist or like a grassroots organizer coming out and making a political message is that when a liberal person sees a doctor, they see someone in power, they see an authority figure stating something and following that. I think the problem with that is when you centralize an authority figure as the person that you go to get your information, is it means that you're more likely to listen to like other authority figures who aren't good, right? Like politicians, like the people who run big pharma. I think it's really important that when we structure political discourse, we do it from the perspective of outsiders and from organizers who exist outside of the political system and outside of power structures. The reason for that is because the political system and power structures are generally rigged against like the will of the people and rigged against like the left's agenda, right? So it's really important that we like from the get-go make sure that like that's an important thing in our discourse. Yeah. Also, now I want to do like a bunch of rebuttals. So on this impact about like on this point about like people feel bad when they see people getting shot, right? So I think that it's actually really bad when you take an issue like gun control and make it into just the body count, right? Because the problem is when you make a political issue into a tragedy like that, it makes it non-political. Because if it is true that doctors are just like tweeting out all these things like, oh, people are dying, like what is a Republican like senator supposed to say? Like, it's not like they're gonna come up and be like, yeah, it's good people are dying, right? They'll come up and say like, yeah, that's really sad. My thoughts and prayers are with those people. But what we have to do is like, spend more money to the police or be more tough on crime or some other thing, right? Because when you make something a tragedy, it makes it non-political and then gets rid of the ability for there to be an argument about that. And the reason that an argument and argumentation is specifically important, as Emily talks about, is that's the way that people get persuaded, right? Even like, because their whole thing about why argumentation is bad is that like, you shouldn't engage with Republicans on the terms of like, why they have a right to guns. You should engage with them on the terms of outcomes. I don't think that those are the only two solutions, right? You can also make an argument, you can also like talk about how guns are harmful, but make an argument about that to people, right? Like for example, like when Democratic senators or like left-wing people talk about gun control, they provide an argument and like give speeches and talk about it. They rely on like, they talk to people and say like, how would it feel if like this was like your family or your family member who died in this violent crime? They talk about like outcomes, not in the term of like individual instances, but systemically, right? By talking about how, for example, if you have a gun and someone robs your house, you're more likely to be shot than if you don't. I think those are the things that really persuade people when you appeal to like argumentation and things that don't just become a tragedy and they're unable to engage with on that basis. Okay. Now this point about like brutal and visceral imagery, like all the reasons that's bad is because like it makes it into a tragedy, but also because it's nothing new, right? They're talking about like doctors being at the border. Like there were journalists at the border who got live footage of kids being tear gassed and literally nothing changed, right? I don't think that a couple pictures of like some like bloody bodies, things that probably are also pretty dehumanized if it's just like a picture of an ER room and like a wound, is really going to motivate people more than like children getting tear gassed. Also on this point of like how people can know the beliefs of their doctors. So first off, I think in most cases, people just don't get to choose their doctor, right? You just get a doctor and that's what you get. But also, like, I really don't buy that some doctor that has like a hot take on mental health is gonna tweet that out, right? If a doctor knows that, like, especially in the US, like a private healthcare system, if they know that like these things that they believe are probably going to have people not come to them for like service or get them more money, they probably aren't just gonna tweet those things out, right? It's not like doctors are just gonna go on Twitter and put out all their hot takes. Like, I don't think that's really what's happening. But also lastly on this point about like, people will listen to doctors. So I talked before about like how, this is the other problem with people listening to doctors is once doctors now, like at least in the majority of instances, come out of being liberal, in the minds of conservatives, like doctors in the medical profession now like is seen as something that is liberal and liberal hacks. The reason that this is really bad is there are times that doctors exist in the media in instances that are important but aren't what they're talking about. So for example, when like the Secretary General of the United States is talking about like how marijuana isn't as harmful as people think it is, or like talking about like reasons why abortion should be more accessible, or dealing with issues of mental health stigma, it means that those conservative people who now view these doctors as liberal are less able to engage in that, or at least like outright don't listen to them and see what they're saying as lies and as propaganda. I think that ultimately, if what Gov is trying to prove in this debate is that like, doctors should be able to say things, then like, yeah, obviously that's true. But I think really this debate about is who should be the people who are saying the main things in the left's discourse. I think doctors shouldn't be those people for all the reasons we told you. Yeah.
government would like to have you believe that stethoscope activism should be a thing because doctors should have a say in policy. Well, we here inside side opposition believe that care and the patient-doctor relationship and that dynamic is the most important, right? So I will be doing two things today. First of all, why proving that their point is low impact, and secondly, proving, again, furthering the analysis as to why care is the most important element, right? And how stethoscope activism influences that, right? Their point about policy is low impact because here's the thing, political issues like abortion, we have doctors there who offer their expert opinion via their knowledge and their years of information about that, right? It's not stethoscope activism in the sense that stethoscope activism as it characterized, it's about doctors posting pictures from the operating room based on this personal opinion or visceral emotional reaction, right? There's two things and they're mutually exclusive in that sense, right? And secondly, about the role in discourse, right? Discourse should be won based on facts and arguments, and opinions should stand on their own merit, right? When you just have a doctor post a picture about, for example, a child getting shot in the operating room, right? As Aiden has characterized this to you, firstly, it's not going to have any impact on conservatives or change of views. At most, at best, it's going to be about liberals who already support this issue just being more enraged, right? And that's low impact because conservatives, as Aiden has explicitly told you, are going to view the pictures as just bad guys with guns, right? It's nothing we haven't seen before. Now, this is why stethoscope activism is bad and shouldn't be a thing, right? Besides, government mentioned that we should know about doctors and basically make doctors also in that whole partisan issue, right? The thing about why we shouldn't know is because oftentimes we can't choose our doctors, right? Recently, the United States has published a list and manifesto of the prices of operations, and that has no impact because people can't choose their doctors. First of all, we don't have an unlimited supply of doctors for people to choose from. Second of all, it's about insurance at time, right? And how it affects care is that some people might have to make the choice between getting a better doctor or getting a doctor with an opinion that they agree on, right? We just ultimately believe that compromises care, and we offer accurate analysis that side government has not engaged on, and why the doctor-patient relationship is built on trust and the expectation that you get the best care you possibly can, because stethoscope activism, as I mentioned, blurs the lines between a doctor being a doctor who offers care and being a private citizen with their own opinions, while although valid, should have no impact in the medical room, because they're basically just hiding behind their clout and offering no actual arguments, right? They're just basically posting pictures out there, and that does more harm than good ultimately, because it makes doctors less objective and have more skewed views. And on the patient side, it affects care in the case studies I give you about obesity and alcoholics and doctors being out of touch, right? They offer no reputation on that. While we here prove why care is important, why it has a lower impact on policy, and why it's harder to overcome bias when you blur these lines. Thank you.
Good job. You're learning. Okay, whenever you're ready.
This motion doesn't need to be about firing doctors, but what it needed to be was them showing us the real harms of this policy on both getting care and also in terms of changing the discourse, right? I don't think they've had adequate responses to this, because their response on discourse is that, oh, it's not going to change it that much, it's just the status quo. And then on patient care, I think they failed to do a correct analysis on how this affects patients, and instead give us some unlinked arguments as to why doctors holding opinions publicly are going to somehow change the way they carry out their medical treatments, even though they have always held opinions anyways, right? So two themes. On first, how we get better policy. Second, on how we get better patient care, right? I think that they present an incredibly idealistic way to achieve change, right? They say that, oh, doctors aren't, shouldn't be basing their decisions based on visceral reactions or based on, unresearched facts. But I think actually, in terms of getting the most change and getting people to actually support, especially those who are undecided on certain issues, to actually support something is when they're able to see the daily anecdotes. What is when they're able to see their social media feed filled with a lot of different discourses and a lot of different visceral images of what's actually happening as a consequence of a policy that they're unsure about, right? I think that they don't engage with the fact that doctors are uniquely positioned on legislation because they're able to see the impacts of certain legislations that have a medical medical implication, right? I think that they fail to like engage with the fact that we're able to at least get some sort of like aftercare for patients in this case, right? I think that even if they want to say, oh, you're less likely to get like Republicans to turn to your side, at least you're able to provide like a different side of the issue, at least for like people who are like Democratic, right? Like I think that right now, because the gun rights debate is really focused on rights, you're unable to see the health consequences. And when you're able to actually make that a central part of the issue and a central part of why what you ought to be debating when you're debating this legislation, at the very least, Democrats might say, oh, you know what, in the meantime, we should try to support more like legislation for those who are victims or for families of gunshot victims, right? Or at least get more doctors down to the border at the moment. I think to the degree in which we can provide even that much impact or turn at least like a couple of people on the margins who are unsure about this policy to support this kind of legislation, we are able to access some real benefits on our side, right? We say that we don't really necessarily need to like change the entire NRA's stance, but we think that uniting people in order to provide more care for those who are victims of a certain policy is something that can be like sympathized with on both sides, right? I think we're able to make some change, and I think that that's the most important thing that we are able to do with this policy in terms of like getting actual impact, right? Second, on how do we get better patient care? Because not that they never engage with the most important people in their character analysis. They just say that, oh, well, now that doctors are like advocating for things openly, the line between like, you know, their personal opinion and how they deliver care is just going to be blurred with no mechanism as to how that actually changes when you decide to like actually speak up. Also, no like analysis as to why, like, how this is going to directly affect patients, because note that now patients can probably just like approach doctors who have a more sympathetic stance to their issues if they wish. I don't think everything is going to be an ER situation where you don't know what doctor you're assigned to. Like, you can literally go to clinics where you can choose doctors or like institutions that specifically support like the way that you believe you ought to be treated, right? I think that they fail to give us any sort of like actual harms in terms of like deterring patients from accessing healthcare in the first place, whereas we actually tell you that patients are able to get better personalized care and are able to access people who would be like better suited to dealing with issues that they want. Also, they talk about how like doctors don't have to tweet out if they don't want to because they lose patients. Yeah, that's fine on our side of the house. Also, I think that they just need to like, if you weigh on the impacts in terms of like whether doctors offer like slightly marginally less caring, like less good care or not, I just think that because doctors are in that position where they literally need to like offer patient care, perhaps like I don't think they're gonna like dramatically decrease the like range of services that they offer to their patients just because they hold like a different political view, assuming those patients decide to go to those doctors in the first place, because we tell you they probably wouldn't in those cases, right? I think that they need to contend with the fact that there are some real policy impacts that can come from this. Like, we're at least able to get some sort of marginal or like some sort of supportive legislation that can be supported by both sides of the like parties, right? I don't think that this necessarily is problematic, and I think that they're on their stance, it's just like to have some sort of retention of the status quo and the current polarization that already faces. I think that we are able to get some